Good afternoon. This is better. You have to turn it on, I guess. Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Dennis Powell. I'm the Vice Chair of the Clinton Church Restoration and President of the Berkshire County branch of the NAACP. On behalf of the board, it is an honor for me to welcome you here today to help us kick off our first phase of construction work to restore this historic property. The cornerstone of the Clinton AME Zion Church was laid on October 6, 1886. 16 years after the women of the AME Zion Society began raising funds to build the church. For nearly 130 years, this church offered not just religious services, but educational programs, community suppers, and as a meeting place. The Berkshire NAACP met in the church basement in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Construct, a local housing organization, was formed in 1969. And after the need for its services became clear at a session of Housing and Poverty held here at the church. Under the leadership of the late Reverend Esther Dozier, Clinton was consistently at the forefront of local efforts to honor the life and legacy of Great Barrington's most famous native son, founder of the Niagara Movement and co-founder of the national NAACP, W.E.B. Du Bois. 3 years ago, Clinton Church Restoration formed to preserve this important community legacy. Today we mark a significant milestone in our effort to return the former church to the center of community of life in Great Barrington, this time as an African-American heritage site and cultural center. You'll hear more about this project from my colleagues shortly. But first, I am honored to introduce Eugenie Sales, our interim executive director.
This is so exciting for us, and I hope for you. So as Dennis said, 3 years ago, Clinton Church Restoration was born out of community concern for the fate of this historic community site. Hundreds of volunteers, some of you among them, supporters and donors, some of you among them, have stepped up to help us save, restore, and repurpose this important place. Local politicians, who I'll acknowledge in a moment, historic preservation advocates, business folks, and media have all lent their support and their voices and expertise, and the voters of Great Barrington provided critical support by passing or approving the $100,000 grant that was unanimously recommended at town meeting by the Community Preservation Committee in 2018. And we are incredibly grateful for all of this support. I would like to acknowledge a few people in particular. This is always a dangerous thing because you're afraid you're going to forget, and since I wasn't involved in the first couple of months, it's particularly risky, but I do want to say first, I'd like to acknowledge State Senator Adam Hines, who's here, who just slipped in. Adam's been a great supporter of ours, as has Smitty Pignatelli, who couldn't be here today. I'd like to acknowledge some of our Great Barrington Select Board members. Bill Cook, Ed Abrams, Kate Burke are all here. Did I miss anyone? I know who they are. Mark Luhensky, who's our new town manager. We're very happy to have him here. Thanks for coming, Mark. Chris Rumble here. Chris is the now assistant town manager and the town planner, and he's the administrator of our CPA grant, and has been very helpful for us. A few planning board members are here, Jonathan Henkin and Pedro Pichano. Any other officials that I haven't registered here? So also here today are Clinton Church Restoration board members, our chair, Ray Gunn, who you'll hear from in a little bit. Cora Portnoff, who is also here. You can tell by the hard hats. Diego Gutierrez is here. Dan Bolognani is here. And I think Francis Jones Sneed and Beth Carlson were not able to join us today. And Will Singleton also couldn't be here. There are also advisory board members here. I know Rena Zarofsky is here. I'm not sure that there are any others that I'm missing. We have building committee members here. Pedro Pichano, who co-chairs with Diego. Paul Ivory, if he's not here, I hope he's on his way. He is here. Where's Paul? Hi, Paul. There he is. Paul's also he's a town official also. He's the chair of the Great Barrington Historical Commission. He's been incredibly helpful to us all along the way. Some of our planning and interpretation committee members are here. Here's Chris Rumble. Hey, Chris. Sabrina Allard is here. She's on our planning and interpretation committee. Who else? Rena Zarowski is on our board, and Jackie Kane has just joined our committee. We're very happy to have her. In our fundraising committee, we have here today Roselle Shartok, Deborah Levinson, and I don't know if Liana is here, but we're very grateful for your support. There are also members of our esteemed design team here. You'll hear from Mario Gooden, who's the project architect of Huff and Gooden Architects. Pam Sandler, who's recently joined the team as the historic preservation consultant, is here. And Marcos Mariaza, who's in Mario's office at Huff and Gooden, is with us. Chris Cole, where's Chris? There's Chris. Chris is our owner's rep. He's responsible for donating these beautiful hats that you all are wearing or seeing. And we've been grateful to have his guidance and experience. He's been involved in the St. James Place project too, so he lives in Vermont, but he knows Great Barrington. And finally, the men of the hour, La Rochelle Construction, Dan La Rochelle, who's the president, Justin Gendron, who's the project manager, and some of their crew are around the corner actually trying to get some work done, or maybe having lunch, I don't know. You can see a full list of folks who are involved in this project on a sort of day-to-day basis on the back of your program. These are the folks who are doing the kind of behind-the-scenes work. I also want to acknowledge people whose names may not appear on these lists who are instrumental in getting us to where we are now. Richard Stanley of the Triplex is here. Tim Geller of the CDC of South Berkshire. Michael Citron of Drury Pass and Citron. These three folks helped us in securing this property and getting established as a nonprofit, and we're really grateful. Also, Dan Bolognani, who's in addition to being on our board, is the executive director of Housatonic Heritage, and they stepped up to be our fiscal sponsor early on and have been helpful in ways I can't even remember all throughout this process. And I just also want to acknowledge all of the volunteers who helped patch the roof before we even bought the church, who've donated supplies for that, who've helped with early fundraising events and planning. A big shout out to all of them. And finally, well, not finally, but I also just want to say a special public thanks to Steve McAllister of Clark and Green Architects, who spent countless hours with his team crawling through every inch of this building to create the historic structure report that is really a foundational document that will always exist for this project going forward. And Veronica Jackson of the Jackson Design Group, who came very early in March of 2017, also before we bought the church, to facilitate sessions at which we could gather public input and key stakeholder input. And she worked with us on a visioning process and then came back in the fall of that year and really helped set us, I think, on the course that we are on now to return this beloved place to what she would say was a community hub. As you know, we would not be celebrating this construction kickoff today without the support of the institutional funders who've provided grants for the stabilization work and also guided us along the way. They are the National Park Service African American Civil Rights Grant Program and the Upper Housatonic Valley National Heritage Area. Massachusetts Historical Commission and the Secretary of the Commonwealth, William Gavin. We have an emergency grant from Mass Historical, and that is something that Secretary Galvin's office oversees. The citizens of Great Barrington, many of whom or a few of whom are here, and the Community Preservation Committee for the CPA grant. And we're also grateful to those who have provided funding for the Phase 2 design work, which is what will come next, starting later this fall. The National Trust for Historic Preservation's African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund, the Massachusetts Cultural Facilities Fund, and the Jane and Jack Fitzpatrick Trust. We have a long way to go in that department, so we welcome your support. Finally, I'd like to share our gratitude for the 500 plus donors and volunteers who have contributed to this project and so generously supported it and believed in the vision that we have. This has been a community-based process from the beginning. We are standing on the shoulders of Esther Dozier and the folks who built and maintained this church for 130 years and worked before that with the Amy Zion Society. To all the folks who've been working to raise the profile of African American history and the African American luminaries here and the life and legacy of W.E.B. Du Bois. This work has been going on for a long time. We're a part of it. We're stewards of this building and these legacies, and we're really honored to be here doing that work. So with that, I would like to introduce Ed Abrams, who is not here on behalf of the Select Board, but rather as one of the instigators of this project and a member, well, as I said, of the Select Board. I like to say Ed's the person that got us into this mess, along with a couple of other people, and he'll tell you about that.
Thank you. So I'll put my Select Board hat on for just a moment and say thank you all for coming. Welcome to Great Barrington if you're not from here. Sorry. So I was walking out of the library one day and Fran, who's hiding in the doorway over there, grabbed my arm and said, "We need to save this church." And I don't know if she stopped me because she recognized me as being on the Select Board or if I was just the guy holding the door open for her. She handed me some Xerox pieces of paper about the historic nature of the church, and I had heard of the church. I know there had been a fundraising campaign a few years back to try and fix it up, but that's all I knew. I didn't even know it had closed. And later, talking to various people in town, and eventually also to Chris Remble, Chris said, "You know, we got to save that church." That was everybody's reaction. And then I found that a number of people had approached the then owner, but it was a daunting task. They wanted a lot of money, and it was in really bad shape. So I thought, let's just make a lot of noise, get a lot of people in a room and see what happens. And that's what we did. We called a few of the newspapers. The Edge wrote an article. They took a picture of me and Fran and said, "We're having this meeting, everybody come." And 30 people or so showed up, including Michael Citron, the lawyer who volunteered to do it for free, a real estate broker who volunteered to negotiate. Smitty was in the room, who was the one who said, "Let's just make an offer." And so along the way, I met Beth Carlson, and she was the one who kept pushing it. So the two of us were the initial unpaid staff in the first months of this. We make the decision, we make an offer through the real estate broker, and they accept it. Now we had to raise $100,000. The purchase price was $70,000. We needed the other money just to keep the building going until we could raise some money. And in 5 months, we raised $100,000. That included small donations. Crumpled dollar bills came from students at Simon's Rock. Well over 400 donors helped us get to that point. We got phone calls from, well, one of the first phone calls I got was from Richard Stanley, who said, "You need office space?" And he gave us office space. People came out of the woodwork to help. Then came the question of, before the purchase, I was asked, "What are we going to do with this building? What's your plan?" This is a 130-year-old African-American Christian church. I said, "It's not for this white Jew to decide." So I don't know. And we started putting together a board of directors. Before we had an organization, we had a room full of people who had stepped forward, and this is where we found Ray. My plan was to back out of the room after that first meeting and leave this in the capable hands of anyone who thought this was worth doing. And Ray grabbed my wrist and said, "You're not going anywhere." He did that over the next several months. I think I snuck out after the closing. And since that time, and I want to read this because I would never remember to do this, to get all this, in the time it has taken between then and now, this group of volunteers established a nonprofit, an advisory board, a board of directors, and various committees. They commissioned the historic structure report. They held facilitated planning sessions to get input from the public. They applied for and received more than $700,000 in federal, state, and local grants. They hired the award-winning design team of architects and engineers, some of whom you'll meet. They hired the owner's rep. They had the property surveyed, undertook tests, and to inform some of the plans and the stabilization work. They hired a general contractor to repair and replace the roof. They issued an RFP for an exhibition designer. They've held various community events, speaking at different events, hosting student groups. An awful lot has gone on before any dust. So it's very exciting that we're about to start seeing dust and something is going to get done. A huge thank you to all of the people who came out and made this possible, many of whom are here, many more are not. All that being said, it's now my pleasure to introduce Mario Gooden, the principal of the award-winning architecture firm Huff, Gooden and Associates.
Good afternoon. It's my distinct pleasure to be here today on behalf of our design team. We are thrilled to be a part of this project. You heard a little bit about the history of this building that Dennis gave in his introduction, but I'd like to say that this building is not only a part of African American history, it's part of the history of America. This modest building is important not only for its association with W.B. Du Bois, who, by the way, wrote in the NAACP Journal in 1917. He was aboard a steamer ship headed to France at the end of World War I. And he wrote in the NAACP Journal called The Crisis. And he was really responding to those who would advocate that the former enslaved and African Americans should return to Africa. He said that African American identity was forged in this country, and there is nothing so American as African Americans. And so this is an American story. Yes, it is part of the African American heritage trail of Western Mass and the Upper Housatonic Valley. Yes, it is part of the National African American Heritage Trail, but this is an American story. It is linked with W.B. Du Bois, but it also tells the story of ordinary people who have bared witness to the ideals of this country, and to African Americans, ordinary African Americans, who, if you will, are the conscience of this country, holding this country to make good on its promises, if you will, to quote Dr. King, to make good on its promises in its noble documents. So I'm going to stop because I could go on and on. But again, it's our pleasure, my entire design team, to be part of helping to bring this story to the rest of the country and also to the rest of the world. So thank you for having us here today. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Mr. La Rochelle, who is going to come and have a few words as well.
Greetings. My name is Dan La Rochelle, president of La Rochelle Construction. Thank you all for attending this kickoff construction of the Clinton Church. We are all very excited and honored to be part of this restoration project. We all recognize that we'll have some challenges ahead, but we are very confident for a successful project considering the group of architects and the dedicated committee that will be able to pull this together. I think we have a very good team and expect a successful project. I want to thank you all for selecting La Rochelle Construction, and we look forward to working with you all. Thank you.
So I have the distinct pleasure of introducing a gentleman who started coming to this church when he was 15 years old. I think it was probably about 70 years that he attended this church, and he is our indomitable leader and board chair, Ray Gunn, Sr.
slow but sure. Hi, Bert and Jane. Good to see you. You know, this is a great moment for me and for you because we've been holding meetings, and I've been telling our board I'm not going to be happy until I see some people up on the roof. Well, it almost happened today, only Jeannie backed out, and she was going to send me up on the roof on a lift, but we didn't get the lift today. So you can blame Jeannie for that. But one of the things that I'm very thankful for is that we're getting this amount of support from people in the community to help us out with this project. There are a lot of people around who have said, what are you going to do with that old building? It's all torn up, it's falling down. And as I said in some of our board meetings, when we send pictures out now, send the worst ones we've got, so that later on they'll see what we've done. Today is the first day that we're actually going to be doing work on the project. Yahoo! And my motto is keep moving forward. That's the way I want to go. So if you see me on the street and you say, Ray, how's the church going? I'll tell you, we're moving forward and looking to raise money. It hasn't always been this way, but it is now, so we're gonna forget the past to some degree and think about the future. All of the young people around, a lot of them don't know what happened in the past, but they can do a lot if they put their tools together, put their minds together, and work on what we can do in the future. Some people don't know where this building is. Well, for one thing, we had that tree removed from the Great Barron parking lot right there. We didn't have it, it died. But now you can at least see straight through to back here. And you can see the church, as ragged as it looks. But just wait, it's gonna be better. We've raised a lot of money. I remember in the first meeting we had, we didn't have a penny. You can't get much lower than that. And we didn't know where the first money was coming from. And then we got our first donation back on November 1st, 2016. And from there we have gone up, up, up. All 400 plus donors. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. And I would like to meet all of them, but I know I won't be able to do that, but I do know quite a few of them. You know, this project is part of a growing movement to preserve and honor African American historic places around the country. This is a local gem, this church, believe it or not. It's on a historic roll, and we have engaged to keep it there, and we have got interpretive planners coming in. All those things that you're going to need in order to make the building work. Now I've got a man standing back there by the name of Dan Balangani, and he's our money man, so to speak. And I keep saying to him, I'm probably a little pain, but anyway, I keep saying to him, hey Dan, can we do this? Dan, can we do that? I said, Dan, no. He tells me, Ray, don't worry about it. We're gonna have a state-of-the-art building. And I said, that sounds good. I want to be able to use the chapel. I want to be able to use the basement and the grounds. And if something's going on, I want everybody to be in on it, especially judging the large crowds we're going to be getting later on. See, I'm in favor of the big stuff. A lot of money, a lot of people. If we have an event, fill the hall up so that everybody can enjoy one another. We purchased the church so that we could do this, and we intend to do it. It's going to be a community place whereby it's open to everything. It's a deconsecrated church, but that doesn't mean if you want to hold a service here, you can't. We're going to be available. One of the things that Reverend Dozier, who was our first female minister, she was ordained back in 2000. She opened the doors of this church and became involved in a lot of community affairs. And we were grateful for that. And she was no longer more active in doing those things than she met a horrible death. So from then, my wife Cora, where are you, Cora? You're sitting right next to Roselle Shartalk. Okay. My wife and I told Esther that we will continue to work on this project and make sure it gets done. So that's what we're doing. That's why we joined the committee, and that's why we're going to continue to work on this thing, and we're going to keep it moving forward. With your help and with donations. Oh, by the way, I just mentioned donations in past. Donations are the big things. In fact, on our table we have I don't want to forget this. On our table we have our pamphlet and envelopes. So if you haven't received one of those, and you got a lot of money to lay down and help us out, that would be great. But thank you very much for coming out today. I think somebody heard that we were going to have this little meeting and gave us the sunshine. Well, that's good. And now I'm sort of said enough, and we should be listening now to our friends in music, Pete Wilson and Graham Dean. Hello, here they come. Boy, they look energetic.